and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Fecal Films.
Yes, we've been doing some research and we've discovered that our previous predecessor show has been a bit crass and not nearly as informational as we would have hoped. So
a little bit too much rant-like, I suppose.
Yes, so we're going to be softening things up here and providing a bit more context to our complaints.
Yes.
So,
it's like, well, today we don't really have that many complaints.
That's right. Today, as you've been able to tell by the title, no doubt, we are doing Batman and Robin.
Joel Schumacher's 1997 masterpiece. I can't say magnum opus because he has just given us so many great films to work with.
I would honestly be hesitant to list the year because this is timeless. This could have been released at any point. From the early days of film, the Citizen Kane era to...
Oh, and the Citizen Kane era would have changed history.
It would have been astounding, and not just due to the effects, but due to the character... We're getting ahead of ourselves.
Absolutely.
All right, so as our predecessor show has done, we will continue on here. I will give the general plot of this film. Don't worry about spoilers, though. Not yet, at least.
Not yet, yes. We've quite a bit coming your way.
Yes. But this film picks up from the previously highest-grossing film of the decade, or was that century officially?
I think it was at least of the 25 years, at least quarter of a century.
Batman Forever.
Yes. I mean, we didn't think that it was going to surpass that film at all. We were like, this is the pinnacle. It's all downhill from here. But he was able to just mount the shoulders just so effortlessly, heroically almost, in order to give us such a wonderful film that he has given us here.
Yes. So this film opens following up on the partnership between Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson as Batman and Robin, as they are, fighting the crime that fills Gotham, particularly in the form of Mr. Freeze.
Yes.
See, Mr. Freeze is going around and collecting diamonds to power his freeze ray. That is the general overall plot, but we are also introduced to the idea that the patriarch of the family, Alfred, he has fallen ill.
Fallen deathly ill.
He has a very rare disease and will soon no longer be with the Bat family. And the story is really trying to cope with that. It's trying to understand the unfairness yet uncaringness of death in a man's life and how to process that in a healthy way, as Bruce was unable to do during his childhood years, thus leading him to become Batman.
It also very directly states that death is indeed a part of life, but it can indeed be averted if you have the resources to do so, as we have seen with both Mr. Freeze and with Bruce Wayne. The bountiful resources they had available to them allowed them to be able to save the ones that they loved and take vengeance on the ones that they did not.
Well, I believe we've broken our spoiler rule already.
We have indeed.
I'm so sorry. Well, as long as we're going into spoilers, I'll continue on the plot. Well. The first act rounds out with our introduction with Mrs. Pamela Dr. Pamela
indeed.
Isley. It's very important to note that we cannot discount the achievements of female doctors such as herself.
No, absolutely not. Especially one as significant and as refined as this one.
Yes.
So and the performance by Uma Thurman drives that idea home, that sense of independence and scientific command that she's able to project onto the world and onto the movie itself.
Yes, of course. We are introduced to her crossbreeding very dangerous and venomous creatures such as snakes with plant life that is unable to defend itself, giving a sort of parallel to the defenselessness of some people in trying to survive in today's much more militaristic world.
Very cutthroat, very, very uncomforting, very... well, shall I say, a very cold world.
Yeah. As she teams up with Mr. Freeze quite later in the film. But before that, we are introduced to our third villain of the film, and by far the most interesting part would be Bane, as the venom that she's being used to make these plants able to defend themselves is now being used to create a super soldier a la the Captain America film, of which it obviously took its inspiration from.
Absolutely.
Here.
You can see the elements of Captain America from, I believe it was the early 90s.
Yes.
When the movie came out, it was a underappreciated gem. I wouldn't go so far as to say a masterpiece as I would of
I believe that
Batman and Robin.
I believe that it's not subtext, it's overtext of nationalism. Really did pull it back from being one of those timeless films.
The subtext in the work is definitely, as you said, not timeless. It is so on the nose that even though the film has many great and admirable qualities, it just wasn't able to create the world within the cinematic world within Schumacher's vision for Batman that was able to facilitate such amazing breakthroughs in sociological and anthropological study through the medium of film.
Right, well, that is why Joel Schumacher is a genius.
Absolutely.
So, when the Dr. Pamela Isley is discovered, her male mentor slash supervisor, at least, has gone mad with power and decides to kill Miss Isley, Dr. Isley.
Dr. Isley.
But it's only after she is saved by her own research, her own accomplishments even, that she comes back better than ever. And now with a poisonous touch, a ability to control plant life, and quite a large stock of pheromones that she can use to bend not just the men, but also women to her will.
And it's rather interesting because the dynamic that she has with the Doctor is so, as I can say, poisonous in a way that his toxicity in turn, at first, tries to kill her. He cannot overcome the rejection that she gives him.
As he states.
As she indeed states. It's very on the nose with that one, but unlike the Captain America movie, this one, it seems to be perfectly placed. It seems to be warranted just in that moment in order for everyone to really take in the absolute full scope of the scene.
Yes.
And when she comes back, when she's able to be resurrected with the power of her many experiments, and how initially he is first just sexually attracted to her, and thus that causes his demise, it also kind of makes a very clear statement on the subjectivity, the exploitation
Yes.
of women, especially women in science and in the arts.
And in the workplace.
And in the workplace, in any form, that Poison Ivy is able to stand as a feminist icon in many different ways because she uses all of the tropes, she subverts all of the expectations that people would expect from a villain of her stature, and she is able to turn the tables to a point in which that she almost takes over Gotham.
True. And that leads us on to our next point, is when she comes to Gotham with the help of Bane, her being the brains of the operation, and Bane representing the muscle of such, she decides that
the brain and the brawn, if
of
you
course,
would, yes.
The plan that is established is that she discovers how Mr. Freeze will be freezing the world. That is his goal. But he's been stopped by Batman and Robin. He has been captured. But I keep on getting ahead of myself. This plot is so dense, it is impossible.
So there's too many layers to even parse throughout the entirety of this episode, honestly.
The characterization, the driving forces, it's all far too complicated for someone as simple as me to understand, but I'm doing my best here. The auction. The auction would be the best place to really start off. The auction for a priceless diamond is being held as a ruse to lure out Mr. Freeze as he requires these diamonds to power his freezeway. I believe, as I mentioned before. Despite the fact, and this I feel is a very interesting thing, despite the fact that diamonds and ice are not intrinsically linked down to the chemical level.
Yes, they actually seem to be almost completely separate from one another.
Yes, one is carbon, the other is hydrogen and oxygen.
Yes. And it seems that the use of it, as we have explored, when we were originally rewatching the film to become reacquainted with it.
As we have watched this film
More times than I can count, probably at least once a week for, probably the last almost 20 years. And it always remains fresh. And the scene that you are referring to, when you see these very rich, white, cisgendered men bidding on these women,
Yes.
Initially at first you could think that this was mildly crass or sexist, as it definitely could come off being, but the inclusion of Batman and Robin as basically the MCs of the auction gives it an idea that this is not really exploitation, this is charity work, and it gives this idea, this duality to the scene that says, yes, this is wrong, but at the same time, though, is it wrong to spend money on a good cause?
I understand that in its entirety, but we are never made clear as to where the money would actually end up.
Exactly, and it's left ambiguous to that fact. So it's the fact of the matter is, though, it also says that if you decide to donate to any particular charity that seems worthwhile, it may very much not actually go to the charity that you were trying to do, like what we saw in Haiti with the Red Cross stealing much money and not helping the people.
It's such ahead of its time.
Also, Invisible Children, which came out in 2012 with the Coney 2012 campaign. The amount of money that was stolen from people who participated in the campaign, very much this is prophetic of these types of movements that come to try to take advantage of the lesser classes,
Yes.
I should say, or the lower classes.
Of course, and an interesting theory that I've seen recently spring up is the idea that while it could be a comment towards charities not being as transparent as they should be, much like the diamonds, especially as that diamond that they were bidding on was very opaque. It was very hard to see through, unlike the earlier diamond, which was just...
It was clean, it was
housed,
pure.
It was a museum diamond as
Yes.
well. Therefore, it was there strictly for educational purposes, not for profit.
Yes, absolutely.
The one that was for profit, however, and that entire bidding process, I believe that it was more representative of how the wealthy and the elite of our generation and the generation before us have started not spending their wealth on any goods and services that can be held, any like actual, I'm missing the word, I can't seem to...
Tangible?
Tangible. That's the word, thank you. Any tangible goods. They're just spending it on more wealth. They are propagating their own wealth. They were
Just for the sake of it.
that extremely large diamond that was very well the size of a fist. It was being bid on for just $50,000 at its lowest.
And that seems to be a little undercut.
That's extremely undercut. And these people, they see such a valuable item, something that could very easily feed a small African nation, as pocket change, something just bought and sold at a whim. I feel that the theory that I've read is very much driving forward the 1% movement that we saw many years ago with the March on Wall Street.
Yes, the 99%, yes.
Yes. So I'm interested in...
Again, another prophetic possibility, really.
Yeah,
as you can see, a correlation between the kind of the rapscallion nature of the 99% who occupy Wall Street movement with that of the bike race that Batgirl gets into halfway through the movie.
I don't believe I've even mentioned her yet. We've been so wrapped up in all of these
We're so wrapped up, and she's such an important character.
Alfred, when he is being told that he is dying due to McGregor syndrome, his niece comes from England to come visit him and, get to know the man who basically raised her. Her name is Barbara Wilson, and throughout the course of the movie, she's revealed not to be the sweet, innocent schoolgirl that we have been acquainted with through our patriarchal media.
Yes.
She is actually very capable of taking care of herself, and not just her own life, but the lives of others in the sense of fighting crime, much like Batman and Robin.
Absolutely. And she does it initially for the adrenaline, for the thrill, for the ability to feel that she's alive, that she's away from the oppressive thumb of the people who are educating her and who are trying to control the way that she is going about her life. And through this exploration, through this rebellion, she's able to not only discover her place in the world, but also realizes that her abilities, her personality, her smarts, her intelligence can not only just change people's lives, it could change the way that the world itself functions.
Of course, and that's just one of the many truly visionary things that Joel Schumacher has put in, not just as subtext, but subtext in these films.
Absolutely. He is indeed, as we've said many times before, the genius director of our times.
I would like to pivot, though, temporarily, from the beautiful feminist that is Batgirl to the toxic masculinity that is Bane.
Absolutely.
Now, I know that many people are not familiar with the comics, especially Bane's introduction into comics, so I would just like to tangent briefly into this particular version of Bane. See, Bane, as initially in the comics and later on in the Christopher Nolan film, is a very strong man, as he has always been represented, but in most films and in most incarnations in the comics, he's also a master tactician. He's extremely intelligent and very capable of creating his own plans. In this film, he's only capable of saying 1 to 2 words at a time, very monosyllabic words, and very much seemingly unintelligent. And I'm baffled. I just can't understand as to why Joel Schumacher would take a complex character such as Bane and boil him down to just being the muscle. He's so much more than that. He's the one who broke the bat. He ruled Gotham on his own accord. He didn't need a partnership, and that goes for Nolan's films too. I mean, why would he need Talia? He can do this on his own. It's bullshit is what it is. Why in the would he ever do that?
We will be right back after a word from our sponsor. And welcome back to Doo-Doo Movies. David, take it away.
All right, sorry about my little outburst there. I've actually come to realize in those short period of minutes that Bane is actually genius in its execution here. Because the Venom, which has never been done on cinema before, or since even, the Venom is obviously poison.
Yes.
Bane is very muscly, very large. He's obviously representative of masculinity.
Absolutely.
Merging the two together, as Joel Schumacher has obviously done, represents toxic masculinity.
Before it even ever really became a very large talking point in modern society.
Yes, it was always there, and I believe Joel Schumacher would be more aware of it than many other men in his generation, as he is very famously very flamboyant director,
yes.
We'll say.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But moving from Bane, as I don't think we need to talk about such obvious topics for very long.
Yes.
We should talk about the obvious relationship between Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson beyond that of crime-fighting partners.
Absolutely. You see many different references, mostly actually told through puns or one-liners that so succinctly let the audience know of the type of relationship between Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson, especially considering the fact that Bruce Wayne constantly references the fact that Dick Grayson's name is indeed Dick.
Which obviously references, well,
his
we don't
penis.
Need to. Okay.
Well, so it's like the fact that we have to state at least to a certain degree what the subtext is going for,
yes.
And it becomes such an integral part of the movie.
Yes, there's one part where Poison Ivy has used her pheromones on the two of them.
Yes.
And they begin fighting over which one is in love with her more, I should say. Which one is deserving of Ivy. We won't get into the obvious materialistic objectifying tones of that.
Absolutely, because they also suffer the consequences for such chauvinistic behavior.
Yes. But as we move forward into the film and the effects of the pheromones begin to wear off, they realize that they were never truly in love with Ivy, it was the pheromones, and that they were truly bound to each other. They say as partners, as brothers. Brothers obviously being very similar to another other word.
Yes, yes.
It's very obvious here that Joel saw these two much in the way that was represented during the early 1960s Batman run. That very ambiguously phrased way of their relationship and how they view each other. It's not sexual in any overtone way. It's much more romantic.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's never the film doesn't have overt sexual overtones unless you refer to the nipples on the bat armor, which of course kind of act more to the suppressed sexuality of Batman and Robin.
I've always taken those particular shots. Everyone jumps on it and says that it's over-sexualizing the male characters. I believe that it's so over-sexualizing that it's actually parody.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's subverting those tropes, and also considering the fact that the nipples exist on both of the males' costumes, but of course not on Batgirl's.
Yes.
So it signifies more the fact that the male image is being more, I would say, humanized, more sexualized in the way that it's not necessarily trying to arouse anybody. It's more simply stating the fact that this does indeed exist. When women have to cover their breasts because of nipples, even though the fact that men have the exact same chest.
Yes.
So the fact of the matter is, though, this is showing the double standard by showing one and not the other.
Which I'm glad you bring up, because our next talking point is the ending fight of the movie between Poison Ivy and Batgirl.
Absolutely.
Which I don't believe I have to explain too much, but I will get into Poison Ivy being more free-spirited, being a flower child.
Absolutely.
Almost literally. She is very much reminiscent of the first wave post-suffragette version of feminism. Very free love and free expression.
The 60s and 70s form of the sexual revolution that came forward, and at first, as her character evolved from very cagey and very closeted in certain ways to being very free, very open, very comfortable with herself, even saying that her blood was replaced with aloe in a way. It gives this idea that the inside of her as a changed person is also in complete, I would say, alignment with the ideals of the sexual revolution going into the 70s, and then also, of course, which was replaced by second wave feminism in the 1980s.
Which, when we get into second wave, that is what was more or less petering out as this movie was being made. It was being replaced with the third wave. But as the movie was being made, there was this tone to Batgirl that seemed very much reminiscent of the second wave of feminism, as viewed by Joel Schumacher, a gay man.
Absolutely, and it seems that we only could have this idea, this concept, truly magnified and elaborated in such a way that it will make sense to all viewers because it was seen through this particular lens.
Yes, of course, Joel Schumacher is a genius.
He absolutely is one of the greatest geniuses of our time.
So the battle between these two, between the ideals of a first wave feminist, a dying breed as the generations inevitably march on, and the second wave as viewed by a man standing on the outside but wanting to get in. Do you believe that having Batgirl, having the second wave feminist, overtake the first wave feminism and not defeating her on her own, but having her be defeated through her own machinations, do you believe that's a statement on how first wave feminism was never truly meant to last, but meant to evolve?
Absolutely. It goes without saying at this point that was the true central core, actually, of the film. I could see that through every scene that you see Poison Ivy or Batgirl interacting with anyone, you could see that these themes are exactly what that is being carried out in each one of these scenes. That especially when the scene happens when Barbara flips Dick over and he's I believe it was she says a really strong hiya.
Yes.
And initially at first glance it might appear to be a little awkward and stilted, but it is so purposely put there. It is literally her flipping the patriarchy.
Yes.
It is quite literally her flipping tossing up or possibly even completely disturbing the status quo.
And I mean, Robin being especially represented with patriarchy, his name being Dick.
Absolutely.
It's almost overtones, but it's just subtle enough.
It's just beneath the line in which that if it was pushed too much further over, it would be exploitive, it would be cheap, but he pulls back just before the edge of no return in order for it to become completely masterful.
Now, speaking of cheap and exploitive, the diamond scene, as I've mentioned before.
Absolutely.
The first one is translucent, very easily see-through and used for educational purposes. The second one...
Almost looks glass.
Yes, indeed. Almost looks like ice.
Absolutely.
The second one is a more reddish hue, a very opaque, almost amber color. One would possibly say it looks like blood. Do you believe that with all of the cis white males voting or bidding on this diamond, this blood-colored diamond, that this is a direct translation to the South African blood diamond trade that has been rampant for many decades now?
Absolutely, and considering the fact that also Robin and Bruce and Dick both end up entering into the bidding after, Poison Ivy crashes the party, if you will, that he bids so high over probably any possible amount that the diamond is actually worth. It is not only representative of the fact that the people of Africa are exploited primarily by Western white cis males, but also sometimes the best of intentions can also lead to some of the worst results.
Also, looking at who eventually ends up with the blood diamond is Mr. Freeze, possibly the epitome of white male as he wishes to turn the world into an icy wonderland.
Absolutely, and considering the fact that he is collecting diamonds of various sizes to power his suit, but also eventually to achieve his own ends, it seems that is also a very direct parallel to the ideals and also tribulations of the Jewish people.
Oh, of course, there's no doubt that the Jewish people are so integral to this plot. Honestly, I don't believe it needs any explaining. But I want to get into the final film that was never able to be.
Absolutely.
Now,
the great work that we never were able to actually see.
Yes, Batman Triumphant was the working title, at least, and the way it would have played out would have introduced Harley Quinn into the thing. The Return of the Joker was a working plot point. But looking behind the scenes, you have, obviously, the Jewish culture that runs rampant in Hollywood. Do you believe that as this would have been the fifth Batman movie in the current saga, I guess you would say, including the Burton films, and the third Schumacher film, that Hollywood put a stop to this so as to stop the obvious representation of the 5 points of the pentagram and the 3 points of the all-seeing eye?
Absolutely. I mean, it goes without saying, considering the fact of how monumental a triumph that Batman Forever and, of course, Batman and Robin ended up being, just this 1-2 punch. The fact that Joel Schumacher was prevented from making the third of his masterful trilogy is very obviously that the powers that be were attempting to stop such brilliant allegory and symbolism being shown to the masses. Just as Noam Chomsky said, the media is a form of manufactured consent, and Joel Schumacher was not having any of that.
No, of course not. He is a man who does not ask for your permission to show you the truth, which I believe is very necessary in today's modern age.
Absolutely. It actually completely relates to the next films that he would do, which would be, of course, his films 8mm and Flawless, both coming out in the same year, and both masterful works, almost on par as Batman and Robin, but of course not quite that far.
Not quite. It did not have quite as much social issues, as he knew that he had to pull back there, lest the Illuminati come after him.
Absolutely, in order for him to get it made. But David, I'm sorry, but unfortunately we're out of time.
Yes, we are.
So I want to thank you all for tuning in. I hope that you have gotten something out of this wonderful conversation that we've had.
Yes,
and I hope that you come back for another episode of Excremental Entertainment.
Yes, thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.